Good evening, all. I think we have all of our speakers here. I think we're live. So, welcome everyone, and thank you for attending. We'll kick off now. So, welcome everyone to the ITBA webinar From Everyday to Show Day Horsemanship That Lasts a Lifetime. So, tonight's webinar is going to cover a large range of topics around horsemanship, including grooming, sales, show preparation, ring performance, and alongside different information on retirement options for thoroughbreds, all beyond their racing, breeding, or competitive careers. So we have a fantastic lineup of speakers with us this evening, and I want to say a big thank you to each of them for giving their time tonight. We have Jane Davis, William Micklem, Ciara Mullen, and Mita Osborne. And we'll get a chance to talk with each of them, hear about their backgrounds and their tips and tricks around these topics. I'd also like to say a big thank you to Red Mills for hosting this tonight. And we will have a recording which people can watch back after, either if they've missed it or if you want to catch up on anything said. So I'd like to remind everyone that questions can be placed into the chats or the comments box as we're going. We can get to these as we're going through our chat tonight, or we'll have a Q&A towards the end. So we also have a big giveaway tonight. Ciara Mullen has kindly offered a lesson and a turnout session, which we will be able to raffle off to everyone who has attended tonight. And a little bit of a bonus, if you ask any questions, your name will be entered in as a second time into the draw. So if you are looking for that, make sure to get your name in there. And a big thank you to Ciara. Make sure to like and follow It's a Groom's Life on Instagram for all Ciara's tips and tricks as well. So without further delay, we can jump over to our panel. I'd like to start by getting a little bit of a background from each of you tonight, what your passion is, what you do. So Jane, I'm going to pick on you first, if that's okay, and we can start off. So tell me a little bit about your background and your role with horses.
Yeah, thanks so much, Hannah, and thank you to the ITBA and all the panelists here for joining us this evening. I suppose my role as within Red Mills, I'm head of marketing. I've been with Connolly's Red Mills for over 8 years now. Previous to that, I held marketing roles under the Horse Racing Ireland umbrella. I would have started in Leopardstown Racecourse and then moved on to manage Tipperary Racecourse for 2 years before coming back to HRI in a central marketing role. So I've been very, very lucky to have my professional career kind of within the thoroughbred industry. And my hobby and I suppose my love for horses is there since I was a child. Grew up competing under the Irish Pony Society, did a lot of showing and a lot of work in Hunter. We had some lovely ponies over the years, and it was really down to, didn't really come from a horsey family, but I had one grandaunt she was an accountant for the BBA, and she was kind of a woman before her time, I suppose, and her entire love was for horses. Everything from show jumpers to show horses, and I often tease my mum I was the wrong generation. I think if mum had a great opportunities when she was young to ride at all sorts of different levels, but I was very lucky. My grandaunt Mary Gibbs, she bought me my first pony when I was just 7 or 8, and I was so lucky to get to spend time. She was good friends with Madeline Byrne, who had nieces and nephews around the same age as me. So my first introduction to riding was under the very watchful eye of Madeline Byrne and her sister Carmel at Marguerite Lodge. And that was a really fantastic foundation. And many of the things I learned there, I still carry forward today. So I suppose that was my start. So I've been very, very lucky to, I suppose, merge my love for horses, my hobby with my career as well.
So you've had, like, I suppose, such a broad range of experience through the whole industry. And tell us, I suppose, you do a little bit of retraining of racehorses as well. So I know is it Mossy you have as well that won the recent open category at Trim. So tell us a little bit about how you got into that aspect of, having worked with thoroughbreds and then suddenly gone, oh geez, maybe I'll take a go at what I can do further.
Yeah, well, I suppose the thoroughbreds have always been a big part of my life. When I was in transition year in school, I spent the summer riding out in Dermot Wells. It was the summer of foot and mouth, so I was managed to convince my teachers I wasn't allowed home from Kildare to Dublin on the back of foot and mouth, so I stayed on the Curragh. That was my first introduction to horse racing, and that's, I suppose, where I got the glimpse that there was an industry behind the sport. So that really put me firmly on the path to wanting to work within the industry, but also my first introduction to riding thoroughbreds. And I've kind of kept up the riding out almost as a hobby. over the years, if I haven't had my own horse, it's always been a way to stay in the saddle. And there's no shortage of trainers that are looking for people to give them a dig out with riding out. But it was really when the racehorse class came to the Dublin Horse Show that it first kind of drew my attention. I've lived for the RDS my whole life. I grew up in Goatstown, so it was only the 1 week of the year I was glad to be from Dublin. Every other time I wished I was from the countryside, but it was always that week. So when the racehorse came to Dublin, the racehorse class came to the RDS, I was like, wow, this is definitely something. So I ended up with a lovely horse called Prince Eric. He was owned by Dr. Ronan Lamb. He'd been in training with Dermot Weld from the age of 2 to 7. He ran in everything from an Irish Derby. He was 5th in an Irish Derby, and then he ran in 2 Irish Grand Nationals. So there's your versatility.
Impressive lineup, yeah.
He even won a charity race with Kevin Orion in Limerick at the end of his career. So he was definitely a multitasker, but he was my first introduction to it. And I mean, he was a bit of a challenge. He spent his entire life in almost like that same routine, that Kerr routine. So he found hacking on his own challenging. He found being at a show with horses coming at him in different directions challenging. But I learned a huge amount from him. And then in more recent times, I've ended up with, as you said, Mossy. He's 7-year-old now. He's by Bated Breath. He was originally bought to Breeze. He was probably too big to Breeze. And it's now, like, looking at him as a 7-year-old, I still think he's a lot of development still to do. But he ran once as a 2-year-old for Henry de Bromhead, and I think it was pretty clear the racetrack wasn't for him. So he was really lucky. He fell into the hands of Sarah Neville, who did a beautiful job retraining him. And I bought him there literally 2 years ago, coming up to our 2-year anniversary, and we haven't looked back. He's done everything. I've shown him. I'm eventing this summer with him. He did his first, well, not his first, but he was 5th in the EI 100 amateur at Hillcrest at the weekend with just a pole down jumping. And his versatility, his rideability, his temperament. And I never envisaged I'd have so much fun with a horse over the last 2 years. He's done everything. So it just shows that their versatility.
And it is, and it's a fantastic opportunity to be able to take them on. On your comments, I suppose, on the RDS, Ciara, we're going to jump over to yourself now. So if you want to tell us a little bit about your riding background and as well your success that you've had at the Dublin Horse Show, as well as the Horse of the Year and kind of Royal Windsor.
Yeah, so I came from a horsey background. I was very lucky. My mom and dad bred drafts. And every year they, of course, wanted to take Mare and Foal to the horse show. So every year we went. I think I've only missed one because I had a stomach bug when I was about 6. We used to get the schedule out, and I'd sit down at the kitchen table and go through what I could enter with my pony. And I started riding in Concealy Riding Centre with John and Sarah Carey, and bought a pony off them. She was a 12-2 out of their riding school. Took her to the RDS when I was 11 and we were 4th. And then from the drafts, obviously, came the Connemara's. And I got a Connemara then when I was 12. And he won in 2012. And then I won the Workers on another Connemara in 2013. And I've been very, very lucky ever since to have really good ponies. We've always bought them as 4-year-olds. A couple of them have come from Clifton Sales. And more recently then, we have had numerous champions, very lucky, with side saddle, Connemara's, Collards, a hunter mare champion, a riding horse champion. So yeah, the love is carried on, I suppose.
And I suppose of that list that you've mentioned there, a lot of accolades to your name. So your riding horse champion, your side saddle. Has there any been that stood out to you most, that's really kind of made you, I suppose, proud, or anything that stuck with you?
My hunter mare champion in 2023 was very, very special. She was a mare that my mom bought off Nicola Perrin, and she was my first proper introduction to horse classes in the hunter ring. And I remember going into the main arena in Dublin absolutely terrified. I was 23 years of age, and I'm surrounded by people that do it full time, that have been there for years and years. And she made it to the final 4 of the Supreme. And I remember standing beside Jane Bradbury and Aubrey Chapman, and I was just like, oh my God, if I never make it here again, this is great. So that was very, very special. And last year I was champion lady side saddle on a horse called Bart. And that was special because I actually hadn't planned on doing it on him. I'd hoped to do it on Joy, but we sold her earlier in the year, so he got the call up, and it had been on my bucket list since I was a kid, and it was great to finally be able to do it.
Yeah, and the Dublin Horse Show is one of those things I think everyone kind of looks forward to. It's always on the calendar. I know I've pretty much gone nearly every year as well, and it's an event to go to. We're going to take a slightly different tact. I'm going to jump over to yourself, William. You wear many different hats, between coach, you're an author, you're an inventor of the Micklem bridle, and you're a presenter. What will be your main passion? What do you think stands out to you that really envisages what is your passion?
Well, everything fits together. And I've honestly been a mad student of equine matters ever since I was 10 years old. So I've had 60 years of study, and I'm still studying. And I suppose that's what drives me on, is because I have a passion, a curiosity for everything to do with horses. When I was about 10, I remember the highlight of our year was watching Millhouse and Arkle go head to head in the Cheltenham Gold Cup. Mm-hmm. Two names which a number of people will not remember because it was so far ago. But Arkle remains the supreme steeplechaser, the Irish horse Arkle. And he was up against his so-called English rival Millhouse, who was the super horse. Now, Millhouse was actually bred in Ireland. So in fact, it was Ireland against Ireland. But Arkle went and won. And at that same sort of time, I remember we got our first television was to watch Snowbound at the 1968 Mexico Olympics. And Snowbound was an off-the-track, injured thoroughbred, and he won the gold medal at the Mexico Olympics over the biggest show jumping track that there has ever been and ever will be. And of course, second to Snowbound was Stroller. At that stage, I hadn't any strong connections with Ireland, but I discovered that Stroller was half Connemara and by the thoroughbred Little Heaven. And from then on, you just jump and jump and jump. Little Heaven has been a constant in my life thereafter. Little Heaven, the little thoroughbred horse, it made such a huge difference to the Connemara performance world. And whichever direction I turned in, I found such interesting material. But the bottom line is, and a word which comes up all the time, is simplicity. So I have had a lifetime of chasing simplicity. And that sounds a little bit sort of out there and doesn't seem to make much sense. But my Micklem bridle is an exercise in simplicity. I wanted to cut out anything that wasn't needed. My book, The Complete Horse Riding Manual, is an exercise in simplicity, because we suffer in the horse world because it's so easy for things to get complicated. There's so much information, so many different methods. And this really is a hindrance to the development of the horse industry. So you could say chasing simplicity has been a key thing in my life. And I've done it on all spheres, all the way through from Pony Club and all of the activities in the Pony Club, and competition at a high level in dressage, show jumping and eventing, and even race riding, which I did very badly and ended up in hospital when I was a 15-year-old because I was such a pig-headed person. I was going to take this novice mare into point-to-point, despite my father telling me I was crazy. Well, I was crazy. So I've had a very wide background, and alongside simplicity comes beauty. I became a coach, and it gives me huge pleasure to see a horse and rider of all different types of horses, all different types of riders, but when they're well trained, they go with great beauty. And it's that beauty which is something which inspires me every day, whether it's of a racehorse or a pony or whatever level it is. The beauty comes along all the time, aligned with the simplicity.
It is, and I think everyone can appreciate kind of the beauty when you see a good rider and a good horse. Mita, I'll jump down to yourself, and I think you're very similar to William in the same. You have a lot of hats between equine vet, thoroughbred breeder, you co-host a podcast, you're a non-executive director at the Irish National Stud. I mean, I could go on. There's a lot there. But again, similar to William, what do you think your main passions are?
Well, I suppose one thing when William said still studying, I mean, I graduated as a vet 40 something years ago. And I never thought I would be still studying at this stage. But I suppose for me, the pivotal thing was going back to college and doing a master's in animal welfare. And that came about because I had been involved in various aspects of racing. I'm not a rider. I'm looking at it in awe at Ciara's wall behind her with all the rosettes. I am absolutely not a rider, but I've been involved in the thoroughbred world all my life. But I became aware of the concerns around welfare, I suppose. And, as a vet, I was usually the person at the table that people would turn to. And I really didn't know much about it. We got one lecture in final year. So anyway, I went back to college and studied for a master's in animal welfare, and it has absolutely opened up a whole new world to me. And I think if you ask my husband, he would say this is when I get most animated, because there's so much to know, so much to learn. And yes, there's lots of stuff that we probably need to learn a bit more about, but we all have the capacity to do that. So I suppose if you were to ask me, I would say I'm probably a welfare communicator, advocate, something in that space. That's where I really am. I find my passion just currently. And I will say that my podcast, or our podcast, because I have a co-host from Australia, has been a great eye-opener for me, because I was in my thoroughbred bubble. But we've had William. William was one of our first guests, and we've had guests from all over from various equestrian disciplines. The whole premise is looking to make horse sports sustainable into the future, from a welfare point of view. And I have learned so much in the last year. It's just been phenomenal.
And I think that point about welfare, it's a topic that has come up in the last number of years, but it is about the care of the horse. It is about the horsemanship and how everyone has a love for it. And it's about making sure that stays and has a longevity into the future with every single next generation that comes on. So on your learning and on your masters that you mentioned you did, what do you think the 2 to 3 key things that you learned about animal welfare were?
Well, I think you've actually touched on the one there, Hannah. I went into that master's thinking, I'm a vet. I know most of this anyway. This is just going to be a tick box. And I discovered that actually animal welfare is not just about the care and husbandry, which is what we all do and we do well, but it's also thinking about what that animal needs. It's not just, we think they need, but what do they need based on their own innate biological needs. So that was a big eye opener for me. I had to kind of reframe how I looked at things. And in 2010 or 2011, a Canadian behaviorist called Lauren Fraser coined a really, really simple concept called the 3 Fs. So, and I'm sure most of the audience know about this. It's friends, forage, and freedom. They're what horses need. Friends, forage, and freedom. In our competitive world, in our breeding sector, all the things we do with horses, we have constrained them. And I think it's our job is to keep those needs at the forefront in whatever we're doing with our horses, and just not to forget that they have these basic needs. And I would add to that, I think horses will really need to feel safe with us. And a trust, that there needs to be a trust between us. And so that's probably my key take home from the program. And I think welfare is seen as it's a word, one of these words when you mention, people say, oh, I'm not sure, but actually we're already doing it. And we shouldn't shy away from maybe thinking about some of the things we do that we could do better, but we have a really good baseline there of good work that we all do, and we should kind of be proud of what we do. We can always improve. I mean, there's things I did in my veterinary career, and I think, oh gosh, nowadays I probably wouldn't do that. And I think we're all the same. But I think as long as we have that open growth mindset, it's absolutely fine.
That's it. It's not a very scary word, and I think everyone has the best interest in mind and in heart in all of their actions that they're doing, that, they're already having good welfare and good horsemanship. I'm going to jump into, I suppose, a meaty part of our topic tonight. Jane, I'm going to come back to yourself. From your role at Red Mills, what would your recommendations be to people looking to gain that competitive edge for showing or for sales preparation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when it comes to animal nutrition, I think, I'm nodding away, listening to both William and Mita. I think the three F's of the forage piece is definitely first and foremost. I think everyone jumps to the hard feed and supplements, and things can be quite complicated. But ultimately, back to William's point, it is about simplicity, and feeding horses first and foremost is keeping it simple. That would always be our first advice. When I first joined Red Mills, we had a wonderful nutritionist there, Noel Brennan, and I remember my induction, my first week, and he sat me down, and he's like, the first question, like someone came to him with a query, it would very much be around, well, what's your forage quality, or what kind of turnout, back to the freedom pieces, your horse having, and again, the basics of just access to fresh water and good forage before looking even at the hard feed. But I suppose from my role over the last number of years and the things that I've learned, like back to the learning piece, like I thought I knew how to feed horses and feed ponies. And when I joined Red Mills and got to spend time with some of our nutritionists and the people who've been working in this space for so long, developing the feeds, developing the formulations, I'm still learning. Like every day you pick up something new and you think about how you might apply it to your own horses. But I mean, if I was to kind of think about what kind of recommendations to anyone kind of watching this evening, it really is, it comes down to knowing your horse. And it does come down as well to just spending a bit of time to learn about the feed, and or just even about what your horse wants or needs, based on their energy requirements, their temperament, the workload that they're currently in. And that can fluctuate and change. So simple things like just understanding how to read the back of a bag, how to select the feeding program for your horse, the simple things like just understanding the composition, the role that the different ingredients play in that composition. So, for example, if you're looking at a more kind of traditional cereal-based feed, that's going to be a little bit higher in starch, it's going to be a little bit faster release energy versus some of the more low-starch products, which are probably more fiber and oil-based. And I think, Ciara, you'd have worked closely with the nutritionists and Red Mills, and I think you'd be able to kind of speak to some of those kind of decisions around selecting the right product. But there's so many resources available now online, even our own websites, that you can kind of, touch on some of those pieces and kind of build that knowledge base. But the second thing I'd always say is to ask for help, and speak to people who have the knowledge in that field. I know, majority of the feed companies out there offer that nutritional support. I know certainly with ourselves at Red Mills, if you were to call in to customer service, you'll be put through to somebody, or somebody will give you a call back, or with the portals on the website to ask the nutrition team. But it's certainly to look for that guidance, particularly if you're starting off a new journey with a horse, or you have a particular target in mind, be it a competition season or be it sales prep, or building up to a championship show like the Dublin Horse Show, because all these things need to be made. It's a gradual piece, and you're never going to see overnight change. And I think it's only human nature that we change something, we expect the results immediately, or we might get frustrated if we don't see. But these are animals at the end of the day. We make our changes gradual, and the patience to trust in the process. If you've kind of done your homework right at the start, you're confident in what you're doing, and then just have that patience. But I remember, again, in my role, the access to different, I suppose, competitive riders that we would have and ambassadors. And it was one of our riders, Edwina Tops Alexander. We got the opportunity to interview her last year, and she mentioned over and over again in her interviews, knowing your horse. And I remember going through the edit and thinking, God, that's very repetitive. But actually, it was such an important point she made. Everything from if you're traveling them or taking them away to a show, to know their habits, know their likes, know their dislikes, and you can build a program around that to support your horse. So it is paying attention to those small details and that patience, I suppose, to be able to kind of read those signals.
So I suppose let's say we've got our horse ready. We have it ready to go to the Dublin Horse Show. We've done our prep for the past 6 to 8 to 10 months. Ciara, you have lots of videos getting your horses ready for show, your final preparation, and what would be your regular preparation for the show, both in the lead up and then on the day?
I think exactly what I'm taking from what Jane's saying is finding a baseline for your horse as an individual, and going back to what William said is keeping it simple. So we treat them all very, very much as individuals, and as Meta said, they have to trust you. You have to know them. And it's not just about having the beauty in the simplicity, it's about having harmony. So as a rule of thumb, we would always have a baseline of the fiber-based feeds and the oil-based feeds. And then I can adjust from that. One might need a little bit more, or one might need a little bit less. And I pick Nicole Groyer, one of the nutritionist brains, all the time. And like that, I'm always on the website. And as Jane said, it's about knowing the composition of the feeds, knowing what's in them. I personally steer away from starch. None of my horses are on starchy feeds because the sharper they are, the harder they are to get to behave. And I don't need quick release energy, especially with a ride judge. So we would have our baseline and add and take away from that. And they would have a very, very, very varied routine. Myself, Mom, and my partner Lee all work. So we don't have time to be there all the time. They get a lot of turnout. My mom is a big hay feeder, so there's definitely no shortage on forage. And we try and have them out overnight because it means less mucking out in the mornings, and they're happier, and it's better on their joints, and it's better on their heads. And then during the week, we would probably school them maybe once or twice. They do quite a lot of hacking. They might have a lunge day, and we don't overwork them because a healthy horse is a happy horse, and a happy horse is always healthy. So we keep things simple and easy, and that's how we get, well, I won't say that's how we get the results, but that's the formula that works for us, and that's the formula that we stick to. Yeah. And if they need more, they get more, and if they need less, they can
and then I suppose when you're getting your horses ready for a sale or for a show, a lot of it is on presentation. You're selling a product in a way, either if you're selling it physically at a thoroughbred sale, or you're trying to sell it to the judge. You're looking to win. What tips and tricks do you use, Ciara, to make your horses stand out? From, grooming, platting, quarter marks, to using, your chalks to make the whites stand out better.
So your feed, first of all, is your blank. You start with a blank canvas, and you already have 30%. If you have the correct shape, muscle, you can add to get to your 80%, and then the rest of it is your turnout. So you might have one that's a bit weaker, maybe a 4-year-old that's weaker of top line. So you might sit your plats a bit higher to create an illusion that they have more top. You could do, if you have one that's weaker behind the saddle, you might put a longer numna on it. Again, it's all optical illusion on the eye. If it's a bit longer in the back, you might do a shorter tail because it'll draw your eye up, and you're not drawn down the back end. You would probably do your quarter marks if you've got one that's a bit weaker of the hip. Instead of doing 3 lines and again dragging the angle down, you could do a V. So you're making the hind end a bit more level. It's all optical illusion, and your chalk, like my biggest peeve is seeing big hairy feathers on lovely white socks. Like, clip them off.
Just make them look that little bit more elegant and a little neater.
You're drawn. Like when you walk in the ring, the first thing the judge sees is either a really, really good overall picture, and immediately they're like, oh wow, what's that? Or you might have a nicer horse that's not done as well, but they're not drawn to it because it's not turned out correctly, which will affect your pull-in. So it might be the difference of being pulled in second or being pulled in fifth. And the higher you're pulled in after the initial go-around, the easier it is to go up.
And I suppose that comment there on that first impression is very important. Mita, I think I'm going to jump to you kind of from a thoroughbred aspect and maybe from a sales point of view. I suppose when vendors or when purchasers are pulling out those horses for the first time to have a look at them, it is almost kind of first glance can make a very lasting impression. So training and assisting thoroughbreds kind of starts at a very young age. And what do you do, or what can you do to give them the best start?
I was just reading a paper today that it was about pigs, with nothing to do with horses, and it said that the offspring of stressed sows, so piglets born to sows who were stressed during pregnancy, fight more after weaning. Now, I think there's a lesson in that for us, because I think if we would try to have as stress-free a life for our pregnant mares as possible, because I think that carries on right through. There's a whole new, well, new to me, science of epigenetics, which really wasn't anything I knew anything about 10 or 15 years ago. But it's all about the science around the influence of, around the pregnancy on how that the offspring will develop, and some of that is health, and some of that is their behavior, their outlook, their personality. So I think that's something we should really be thinking about. I think every interaction we have with our young stock, your foals, right the way through, is setting them up for success, or setting them up to being the awkward, difficult horse that no one wants to have anything to do with. So again, another really interesting study from France said that it's not about the whole imprinting, the Robert Miller idea, with the baby foals. It's actually, what you can do is go in and just chat to the mare and give her a bit of a brush, and so that the foal sees that these humans they're not too bad, they're not too scary. So there's lots of really interesting stuff in the scientific world that I think we can be applying. And that's kind of what I like, reading this stuff, and then I go down, tell the lads, listen, this is something we should be doing. And then weaning, I think for young stock, because we sell foals and yearlings, so weaning is absolutely critical. As stress-free a weaning as possible is going to help, again, set them up not to be a ball of nerves when you get to the sales. And I think at the sales, probably, I have a big thing that you shouldn't see the handler, you should just see the horse. So it's important to match your staff, whoever, to the horse that you are presenting, in terms of size, their stride, and just that they don't fuss, that they're just there, and the horse speaks for itself. So,
and I suppose when you're looking at these scientific articles and you're getting loads of these ideas, it's almost like it can overwhelm you a little bit. You want to do everything because they're all such good ideas. But from a very practical sense, you can't do everything. You're going to be restricted to your staff numbers, or, the amount of turnout you have available. With busy yards, with all of this, maybe what are one or two key practical elements that can be implemented?
I just going to be very boring here and say, just keep the friends, the forage, and the freedom. Just think about, have they an opportunity to interact with another horse, whether it's turn out in the afternoon, whatever it might be. Can they see other horses? Have you got, half walls in your stables where you could maybe take out some bars or take out some boards? Socialization is absolutely crucial for horses. They are social animals. That's just their absolute inherent nature. And we put them into box stalls and we think that they'll do fine. And I know what Ciara's saying about the healthy horse is the happy horse, but I sometimes think about a prisoner who is, he's got shelter, he's got 3 meals a day, he's got access to exercise facilities, he's got healthcare, but you wouldn't describe him as happy. So, there's the mental side. It's not just about being healthy. There's a bit more to it than that. So I think, as I say, think about the socialization, think about the forage, and the freedom to me is partly about movement. Yes, absolutely, that they have this opportunity to move because horses are programmed to move, but also freedom of choice. Do they, the ideal situation is that they can seek shelter, seek shade, go to the water, go to the feed pot, go to the hay, that it's their choice. It's not just rationed out and given to them at when we want to do it, that they actually have some choice in the matter.
I suppose that's it. It's really just meeting those key values that makes a horse and then makes them happy and healthy. So William, I'm going to jump to yourself now. Mita mentioned a couple of things about kind of genetic influence and about kind of bringing up, I suppose, growing up and the genetic side of things. But how, I suppose, the use of thoroughbred blood in the sport horse world has, both in show jumping and eventing, has become much more pronounced. I suppose, can you let us know how valuable it is to be able to mix those and to be able to, I suppose, to see the benefits in both sides?
I can. Can I jump back one?
I'll go.
Because the key to a happy horse, the key to welfare is not just the things that have been mentioned. The one thing that must be done is they must be worked in a good way. And I want to give an example, and it's connected with why we want to use thoroughbred blood as well. I had a horse, two full brothers, High Kingdom and Mandiba, which both went to the Olympic Games. High Kingdom won a silver medal. But High Kingdom, as a 3-year-old, was stiff in his back. He trotted badly. He didn't look well at all. And it took me 3 months to get him to come through in his back and to go well before I would put a rider on his back. Whereas Mandiba, it took 3 days. He was, as it were, born coming through his back. And it's the same with a human being. Maybe you get there are a lot of humans with bad backs. When the bad back is at ease and you work as one unit, then you are a much happier individual. And it's exactly the same with horses. We have a problem because we're going to get on the horses' backs. And there are just so many horses who drop their backs as a result and lose that connection from the hind end to the front end. Now, the greatest show horse producers in history are those who are wonderful riders who get their horses to come through their backs. And as soon as they come through in their backs, they look more beautiful. Now, the connection with the thoroughbred horse there, which again is something I think we often forget, is that a thoroughbred horse is a winner if it's the supreme athlete. It is the supreme athlete, but it can't be a supreme athlete unless it uses every single part of its anatomy, including its back. And thoroughbred horses are bred over the generations, actually, to naturally use their backs. The ones that don't use their backs very well don't gallop fast. Now, they use their backs and work as one coordinated unit. That's when the stance time, the amount of time the horse's foot is on the ground, is reduced and the flight time is increased. And immediately that looks more beautiful. And it applies to show horses, race horses, all different types of horses. And thoroughbred horses, generally speaking, have greater spinal flexibility. It's not going to be a huge amount, but they have greater spinal flexibility and elasticity than most other breeds. And provably from the research, they have more elasticity in their tendons and in their ligaments, which allows a sort of free energy as it springs back off the ground. And this is the basis of what makes them what I often call the supreme breed improver, as well as the world's greatest athlete. And people say, well, the thoroughbred horse is not the world's greatest athlete. Well, I say, well, can you find me a faster one? We'll ignore the quarter horses over very short distances. They jump the greatest distances in terms of long jump, and they used to have the long jump at the Olympic Games. Any steeplechaser that you will see is regularly jumping 24 to 27 feet, 8 meters plus, when it does a steeplechase fence, which is 1.40 meters. And they don't just do it once, they do the whole track, and then they do another race, and they do another race. The world high jump record was won by a thoroughbred horse in Argentina, just over 8 foot 2.5 inches, I think it was. The greatest number of horses jumping over 7'6" in history are thoroughbreds. There are 2 horses in that group who are not thoroughbreds. All of the others are thoroughbreds, and there are about 20 of them. So they are the supreme athlete, but we are told that these other types of breeds are better. Now, in show jumping, you are right when there is more thoroughbred blood being used, but we aren't told it. I got the list yesterday of the top 20 top 20 warm blood stallions in the world at the present time, and 18 of them were 50% or slightly more than 50% thoroughbred. In other words, or you could say a majority thoroughbred, but this is hidden. And I mentioned Stroller and Little Heaven. It's difficult to find a top-level performance Connemara pony without having Little Heaven in its breeding. I was in America, and they love the Connemaras in America. And when I first arrived there on the first day, this little girl called Karen Lende came into the arena on a grey pony, beautiful, beautiful, called Erin's Shamrock. You can't get much more Irish than that. And I looked up its breeding later on, and it was out of a mare who was by Little Heaven. So that influence came back there again. And I formed a long pupil-teacher association with Karen Lende. And eventually she bought from me a horse called Biko. Biko is a thoroughbred horse by Beauchemin out of a Prince Hansel mare. I bought him as a 3-year-old. She got him when he was a 6-year-old. And he became the horse of the millennium, the horse of the century in America, pure thoroughbred horse. And what was interesting was he could have been a top horse in dressage, show jumping, or eventing, or indeed he would have been a racehorse. His full brother Jumbo didn't quite have his speed, but won a race at Cheltenham with Josh Gifford training.
Listening to that, I feel quite privileged having to be in the thoroughbred industry, in a sense, to know that they are such extreme and performing athletes. And I suppose there's plenty there that is available to them, and to have that influence in both the eventing, the show jumping world. It's not just to kind of a racing career. There is, other options for them as well.
But they need to be, and this is a key point, taking a horse off the track, you need to assess them properly. And in the case, some horses have little problems from a veterinary point of view, that needs to be sorted. Some horses have a problem with the way of going, and that needs to be sorted. And that needs real expertise to do. And then there's a segment of horses who just naturally just go very well. But that assessment off the track is an absolutely key thing. People are not looking so much for the thoroughbred horses as they used to. But they should do, because within the cohort of thoroughbred horses coming off the tracks, there are some wonderful, wonderful, wonderful horses. But they need assessment at the early stage. And if the horse is physically got a major problem, there's no point knocking your head against a brick wall. And people say to me, well, we want sprinters because they're the better jumpers. I can tell you categorically, because I have a list of all of the horses that make Grand Prix in show jumping as pure thoroughbreds, and the same in eventing. It's not the sprinters, it's the 1.5 mile horses and longer horses who do the decent job. And what is interesting is they're also very level in their conformation. We talk about horses that are downhill or uphill. We actually want horses to be pretty level as young horses. Horses that are born uphill, and on the continent they try and produce horses that are born uphill, they often have spectacular trots, but very few of them have good canters. And we all know the thoroughbred horse is made to canter and gallop. So I'd say the thing that's missing with them is the trot. So if you're looking to bring a thoroughbred horse into your stable or use a thoroughbred horse, find a horse that can trot. And the trot is absolutely wonderful in terms of making the horse straight. So the best racehorse trainers in the world do use the trot, and their horses are much straighter as a result. But it is a problem if a horse has done very little trotting in its life. They often tend to be very crooked.
I know you see a lot of trainers now really focusing on the flat work aspect of mostly to help their muscle development, also to get their head thinking about every aspect of it as well. So kind of on that point, Jane, I'm going to jump over to yourself. Having had a bit of experience with the retraining of the racehorses and those different classes, what impact do you think had nutrition and a kind of development, performance, and taking that break has on those retraining, those racehorses that are going on to retrain, both from them letting settle after their racing career to promoting different muscle types, to the different requirements that is now needed of them?
Yeah, without a doubt. And it is just treating each individual and understanding a little bit about their past, where have they come from? What was the routine like in that yard? To William's point, what kind of work were they in, and did they have the opportunity to do flat work? What age were they broken? What distance were they running on the flat? Did they run national hunt? Did they run for many years, or was it just a short career and then they had to take a reroute? So assessing that individual and getting an understanding maybe from the people who had it beforehand, as much information as you can gather, I suppose, and then to William's point, kind of assessing how they are now in the present. Definitely giving them a chance to readjust is so important. I know in my case, taking the likes of Prince Eric, he was 7 years on the Curragh. That was a huge readjustment for him, and that posed lots of challenges for him. I had another horse who only ran a couple of times at a point, and he ran in Ballindennis in May. went to the Dublin Horse Show as a lightweight in the end of July. It was an Olympic year, and he was fourth in a very competitive lightweight class, but he just had the mind for it. He took to it like an absolute duck to water, and nothing seemed to faze him. And he went on to have a really successful eventing career. And Emma and Jim Newsom bought him off the back of the Dublin Horse Show run, and he went on to have a great eventing career in America. So he was a completely different situation to the first horse. So from a nutrition perspective, just again, there's lots of ways that you can support them in that transition, particularly to understand what kind of a diet plan they're on beforehand, and just helping them making any of the changes that you're making to make them that quite gradual. Again, a lot of these horses are used to being, very much fueled for the workload that they were in. So making that adjustment that you can kind of still cater for all of their energy requirements. And a lot of them, you'll find you're probably one of your key goals at the start is to look to kind of put on condition and build condition. And then also it's a totally different structure of muscles they're going to be using when they come into their flat work, and giving them time to introduce that kind of work quite gradually, particularly if it's, if they've come from a yard where they went from the walker to the gallop to the walker to back to their box. So again, taking that transition into the different exercises that they're going to be doing quite gradual. They are going to be building and using maybe muscles perhaps they weren't using before, or you're looking to have that nice connection with them. You're looking to kind of having them go in a nice flowing shape. That can sometimes be quite challenging. So nutrition can support them. Again, you're probably looking at your feeds that are maybe that lower in starch, that slower release energy. But a lot of people mix up protein with the energy source. So these horses at this critical time of transition, they absolutely need the protein in their diet to be able to build the muscle, to be able to allow the muscles to recover. But the energy source is coming from the grains. So you're probably going to look towards a cereal grain-free feed option. That the energy is coming more from the oils and the fibers. And then again, not to be afraid of the protein, because that's really going to help them and support their muscles as they make that transition. And then I suppose what's not measured can't be improved. So I'd always say to people is to simple things like understand how much feed you're feeding. That way you know if you need to either bring it back or increase. And depending on what you're looking to achieve, if they're a little bit more lacking in condition, you want to add calories to the diet, but you don't want to increase energy, there's ways that you can do that in terms of product selection. And making sure they have all the right micronutrients as well to kind of support them and support their immunity and just support their overall health and well-being during that transition. But like I said before, it's definitely worth reaching out to speak to a nutritionist or speak to your feed company or your feed rep, because that advice will definitely be critical at that stage of transition and really will help make that transition maybe a little more smoother. Particularly if the horses have come from maybe like that stressful environment, they may have some stomach issues. You may suspect they have stomach ulcers, or so. As to William's point, there's a lot of assessment at that stage to figure out any of those challenges right at the beginning, so that you're kind of starting that journey on a very kind of comfortable platform before building up to your future plans.
And then, Ciara, we're going to jump to yourself next. So, talking about those stressful times and going to those kind of high stress environments, the sales ring and the show ring can be very scary places, either for a first time youngster or a seasoned professional. So what do you do to help reduce that anxiety and to ease the horse into those busy environments?
I think it's one of those things like what we were saying earlier, you're never done learning, and each of them are individuals. And again, you assess them. So we would try and take them away from home. And we live right beside Colossary, so we're very lucky that the Glynn family are close. And we would take a 2-horse over with a more experienced horse and a younger horse. And one of us would be on the experienced horse and one of us would be on the baby. And you kind of get a feel for how they would cope. Some of them cope better than others. One might say we did that with one horse and they were good. They would be ready then to go over when there's a little show on, and they could have a trot around the warm-up and stand on the truck and the sights and the sounds and listen to everything. Or you might have one that didn't take to the first day out so well, so they'll have a second chance of doing that again. And it's about not getting ahead of yourself and listening to the horse as an individual, and not pushing them to be ready, because you'll only land up going backwards. And it is about listening to them and taking them as individuals and going to the next step when they're ready. And then they might progress from a glossary show to one of our lovely summer shows outside on grass. And again, they'll have another ride around before they go in the ring. And I think that's equally as important, because in your horse classes, you have ride judges. And your ride judge is not there to school your horse. They are not there to be crash dummy. And I always describe it as, it's like getting in an automatic car. You put it in drive, you put it in neutral, and you put it in reverse. They're not there to put inside leg to outside hand, or, they want to get on and say, do I like this ride or do I not? Is it straight? Is it crooked? And does it have the gears that I want, be it a hunter or a riding horse or whatever it is? And they want to have a nice time and get off smiling, not get off and go, oh my God, the homework's not done on that.
I think we've all seen. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, just to Ciara's point on that, like, I suppose a judge wants to get down off, or when you're riding, I suppose as a ride judge, if a horse is actually enjoying what they're doing under you, that as a ride judge, I always find almost filters back. You get that feeling back, and it's going to make the ride even more enjoyable. So I think that ease of which they go out, to Ciara's point, like, you're not there to school, but I think that's a huge thing for me, Ciara, when you get down, or you're experiencing, they feel happy under you. I think that's a huge part of it.
And then Mita, over to yourself as well, from the other side of things, from the sales angle and from sales preparation. They can be equally stressful times, either for, a weanling, a yearling, even mares going, suddenly taken into a new environment. How good is preparation at home on the farm, and what can we do to kind of help them from a management and behavioral perspective?
Oh, I think it's crucial. I mean, I'm just thinking about our foals. We've put in a walkway that's about the length of what you would be walking on at Goffs or Tattersalls, and at least once a week we have what we call a formal show, where they're walked up and down. We get a few people to come along. There's a bit of chit chat. They walk over, stand around the horse, maybe try to pick up a leg. Do the sort of stuff that would happen at the sales, so that they get very used to it. In the beginning, we do them in pairs, so they always have a companion. They, the more anxious, more nervous ones, will have someone that they can kind of look over at and say, "Am I okay? Is this okay? What they're doing to me?" And we'd hope to progress from there. I think it's also important to finish on a good note with whatever that show, whatever you've done, that you don't try to get the perfect stance. If it's good enough, it's good enough for that day. That's great. Well done. Scratch on the withers. Well done. A little bit of something in your hand. Just to say, yes, that was what we wanted for today. We can always build on that the next day. Small things like learning to load and unload, and definitely in and out, going in and out of a stable, because foals in particular, gosh, they can be shown 60 or 70 times. It's a lot to ask. Getting used to having a bit in their mouth, but not leading off the bit, just leading off the head collar, but the bit is just there. Habituation, getting them used to things, every day for a horse is a learning day. So they're building on what they've learned already. They may have had a bad experience previously, and you just don't want to go there again. So it's all about them being in their comfort zone and thinking, yeah, this is not a bad, this being with these humans and doing this stuff. It's okay. I can cope with this.
I suppose it's just taking things slow and really getting them used to it. You mentioned a couple of bits there on, getting them used to the bit, getting them used to traveling. I suppose the sales welfare guidelines are there from the sales companies just to put a guideline there for people in, I suppose, the general things of how things should be done, just for ultimately the benefit of the horse. So I suppose, are there any points on like the importance of those? And
well, just before we came on air, I went on to one of the sales companies' websites. I won't say which, just to see where the guidelines were. And into the search box, I put welfare, and there's a mare called Welfare, and she's had 3 offspring that have sold. The sales, the actual guidelines, disappointingly for me, were way down. You can find them. I just wish they were more front and central, because I think it's great that they exist. I think everyone should be aware of them. I think they should be posted up on barn ends. You know what I mean? I really do think they're so important. So maybe the sales companies might take a note of that. But look, it's good to have them. There's stuff in there that people might not have thought about previously, and it's just a lot of it is common sense. But sometimes common sense is a little bit uncommon, so it's good to have them there for people either starting out in the business or who've been doing it for an awful long time but didn't realize some of the simple things that are in there that actually improve welfare of the horses.
Yeah. And William, I'm going to jump to yourself now on kind of the topic of training, retraining, especially with young horses, all these different environments. There's a lot of different kind of physical and mental aspects when it comes to retraining. So what are the things to consider when you're looking at the comfort of the horse in these aspects?
It's a very big subject, and not easy. Our biggest challenge is that horses are first-time learners. Therefore, if they have a good experience, no problem. If they have a bad experience in anything, they tend to remember it. So it comes back to my simplicity thing. We want to cut out as much of the equipment, as much of the activity as possible, and just keep it very, very simple. So my father used to have, after the Second World War, just horses to manage that other people had failed with. There was a much wider body of expertise then in looking after horses, and breaking horses, so-called starting horses. So he just had the difficult ones, but he would take all the tack off, have no tack whatsoever, and just have a box which was about the size of 3 or 4 stables, and get the horses to walk left and right, and to come to him, and to turn, and to get that communication going. And that is the key. And horses are remarkable. As soon as they realize that there is some communication between themselves and the trainer, and it's something that can be repeated, they will come to you and have great confidence in you. And it's remarkable what they can listen to, and it's remarkable what they can respond to, which connects with something which I'd like to mention, which is Festina Lente, where we have hundreds of students with quite severe challenges. And even though some of these students are very limited in what they can do physically, sometimes verbally, it's remarkable how quickly the horses pick up on the cues from those individual riders and develop such a special relationship, which is, of course, what makes horse riding so special. And I would go as far as to say that it's just as special for those of us who are less challenged, that we can have this special relationship. So number one is believing that you can have close communication. You don't need violence. It's absolutely key. I was talking to a man today who said he was a racehorse trainer, who said he was brought up to be violent to horses. And now it's taken him probably 40 years. He now says he realizes that violence is not necessary. Violence is not necessary, so we avoid that. I would work in a small area, just as my father did, getting the horses to stop and start, turn, being able to teach them what a reward is, which is not a great big slap on the neck, but they were able to teach them what a reward with, and particularly to go in both directions and work from both sides. I have a real problem with the sales procedures where horses are only led from the left-hand side or only jumped on the left rein. All it's doing is perpetuating a horse's crookedness from a young age, and then it's very difficult to do that retraining. I'd like to see the sales company, however difficult it is to change that, so that we see them jumping on the right rein, we see them being led on both sides. But of course, we've just got into a habit of doing it in one particular way. And then, as I said, I don't do anything as regards riding the horses until they're coming through in their backs. So I do that on the lunge. I actually do very little driving, and people love driving. They love long reining. I only do the very minimum that's required because so many horses have mouth problems. Often people don't realize that the horse has a mouth problem. Often people don't realize that the horse's tongue is over the bit. But in racing, as you probably know, there is an increasing number of horses that have tongue ties on them because they raise the tongue to put it over the bit. And a horse that's learnt to put its tongue over the bit, a horse that's afraid of its mouth, it's a long-term retraining job, which makes them less able to go down different careers. I mean, I would work a lot of horses who have that sort of problem in a bitless bridle, not the type that squeezes their jaws together, not a violent bitless bridle, not like some of the ones you see, particularly in Western riding in America, but a gentle bitless bridle. And once the horse is going well in a bitless bridle, then it's much easier then to put a bit in. And the fascinating thing is, if a horse is going well in a bitless bridle, it will have a white mouth. So people talk about having to have key bits and the horse learning to accept the bit, it will then have a white mouth. It's nothing to do with that. If the horse is relaxed, if the horse is coming through its back, it automatically will have a white mouth. So I don't use any key bits. I just use plain snaffles. I don't use any particular gadgets whatsoever. So I keep it very, very simple.
I think that's the key point, is the simplicity. I know your mention of Festina Lente there. I've been very lucky to have visited out there myself briefly when I was back in college, and just seeing both the work that was being done and having done a semester of the assisted therapy and learning. I think it's just the communication that we can learn from horses and horses can learn from us. It's very easy to forget in a busy day, in a busy environment, when you have all your horses to feed, you need to muck out your stables, you need to get everything done before lunchtime. If you enter into, your yard or your stable with that mindset, the horses are going to pick up on it and everyone's going to have a bad day. So I think it's really about, slowing down. They're animals. They can teach you so much more. And, there's a lot to be learned from them. Thoroughbreds, I think we were told in our lessons that we're exceptionally good at it because they're very quick to react. We describe them as flighty, but it's that temperament that shows you very quickly how they're feeling. And I suppose, ultimately, William, what is your opinion? Obviously, the thoroughbred is great in mixing them, but from a physiology point of view, how do you think both the traditional Irish horse and other breeds have improved by the use of thoroughbred blood?
Well, it's the supreme breed improver, as I've said, and there isn't a single breed that hasn't benefited from bringing in thoroughbred blood. And the point you mentioned there about being more sensitive, and then you use the word flighty, it's not surprising that horses become flighty if they're kept in single stables. I've never used single stables, even with the competition horses. And the thoroughbred horse needs freedom. The other side of that coin is, if it's never had this freedom in its life at all, can find that freedom a little frightening to begin with. So that has to be done in a gradual way. But to give the horses freedom is so important. Could I very briefly read? I believe that an association with horses is good for all of us, not just for the people at Festina Lente. And so this is the reason people say, well, you shouldn't ride horses. It's cruel. At one extreme we'll say, well, just stop riding horses. But I say that the fact that horses are good for our mental health is so important. At its simplest, it's because the horse is a non-judgmental companion that encourages calmness, gentleness, and emotional control. A companion that encourages responsibility, discipline, and persistence. A companion that can give new freedom for damaged legs, bodies, and minds. Now, that to me is at the heart of everything that we do with horses, is our special relationship. That is at the heart of why we work with horses. And I think as an industry, if you can use that word industry, as a sport, the more that we explain and show that this is true, the easier it will be to go forward with a smile on our faces, and having the horses a smile on their faces as well. So it's about life-enhancing learning for both humans and horses. Was lucky enough to be brought up in a way as a child where this was so, and I was staggered when I found there were many other places that was not the case. Mm-hmm. So if we go forward like that, the future is so bright for the equestrian industry.
William, I think that's a very kind of bright note that I think we'll start to wrap things up on here. I think it encompasses well on the topic of horsemanship from, that everyday learning, from everyday work to continuing to the longevity of your horse and the relationship with them. For all of our attendees, we do have I'm going to jump to our Q&A session now. So we have a couple of questions in already. But if anyone has any questions as we're going, you can feel free to drop them in the comments and we'll get to them there. So I'm going to jump up the top now and we'll just go kind of in order. So I think, Ciara, we might jump to yourself there. And I suppose if any other of our panel wants to jump in as well, feel free. So what advice would you give to kids who didn't come from a horsey family life, but have started showing over the past few years in the Connemara flat classes?
I think it's just having your basics right. English judges come over now and they have 50 marks for type and 50 marks for your show. And a lot of people don't think about their marks in the in-hand, which goes back to the sales prep and sales side of it. How you present your horse in hand always amounts, and like what Meta said, is you should look at the horse and not the handler. And if you are standing and presenting your horse correctly, you shouldn't be taking away from the overall image of the animal when you stand it up. And also your straightness and your correctness of a good show. You don't need to overcomplicate things. And it's about having your basics right, your rhythm, your straightness, your canter leads, which I struggle with on my babies at the moment. And having your basics put in place, and it's achievable for anyone. And I think the fact that now that we have to qualify for the final is brilliant as well, because everyone starts off on a level playing field and you have 4 opportunities to go and qualify, and it's for anyone.
And then a follow-up question there. So do you think that there should be a point system with judging in the flat classes?
They did bring it in the IPS a couple of years ago. I'm not sure if it's still there. Yes, I do, but then we lose the importance of our go round if you just mark the show and the confirmation. So I think that needs to be looked at, because the go round is just as important as the show.
I think when it comes to showing as well, particularly for kids coming into the sport, one of the more challenging things can be is that showing to a certain degree is subjective. And I think that's a real learning curve you have as a kid coming through. You think you went into the ring, you did everything right, did everything your mum and dad told you to do, but maybe you weren't at the top of the line. So I know something we were told as kids was, if you did better than you did personally the weekend before, that was an improvement. And
I'm going through that now.
Yeah.
It's all about improving personally. The only person you're competing against should be yourself.
No.
So if you can sit on your horse and say, did I do a good show? Yes. Was my go around good? And also being very self-aware of, I could have been better, or these are the things that I personally want to improve on, and coming out and doing your homework and being better the next time for yourself and not for anyone else. That's definitely a very good point.
So another question here is, obviously it'll vary horse by horse on that basis, but what would a typical day before a show look like in terms of work for the horse? Probably to Ciara or Jane again.
I would go for hack, because you're not going to fix anything the day before a show, and there's no point overcomplicating anything in life. And again, the horse needs to be happy and content, and it doesn't need to be stressed, and you don't need to be putting pressure on yourself or the animal and overcomplicating everything. So go for a nice hack, be happy, and set up for the next day.
So I think a point that kind of all of our speakers have made is the simplicity in the day, and not to be overly stressed about.
The last thing you want to do is create a problem the day before or the night before a show or a competition. So it's getting the homework in well in advance. So yeah, I would totally agree with Ciara on that one.
And then a question here on, I suppose, training methods. So in the preparation of young horses for the show ring or the sales ring, would you see the use of training like the TRT method as a beneficial approach to helping improve horses' overall welfare? A number of our panel who might jump in on that one there.
I would say no question. those any methods which concentrates on the mental connection between the horse and rider as the start off point must be good. And again, horses are quite remarkable. I mentioned the method that my father used, and not dissimilar from Monty Roberts. And when you can, in such a short space of time, a matter of half an hour or an hour, you can build a relationship with the horse that it will follow you over something pretty scary, or it will be so much of a team member in such a short space of time. It shows you that making that mental connection at an early stage is so worthwhile. But then beyond that, you have to have the knowledge to be able to train the horse to develop its physical abilities so it becomes an athlete. I'm not talking about an Olympic athlete. I'm talking about a horse that every part of it, the horse, works together as one unit. And that's where the lunging without a rider and the riding with rising trot or riding with a light seat is so very important. The show jumpers, generally speaking, do some magnificent flat work. I saw Cian O'Connor jump when he was second in the Grand Prix in Rome the other day. The flat work that he was doing in his second round was quite extraordinary, worthy of any Grand Prix dressage test. But they developed that connection because they don't go bumping around in a sitting trot. So I would say to everybody who's listening, if you can do a good sitting trot, so much the better. But all of you can prepare your horses just as well as that by using a balanced rising trot where you just kiss the saddle and don't come down heavy, because that is the big problem, is that the horses don't like this bumping around in the saddle, and they freeze in their backs, and it stops the connection from the back end to the front end. And that's when people just ride off the front end, putting the head and neck in a particular position.
William, can I get you quoted on that and send that to my coach, that I no longer have to do sitting trot, please?
Absolutely. It brings a smile to our faces there, but there is nothing worse for a horse than a bad sitting trot. And people say, well, how do you learn a sitting trot? It's easy. Once your horse is coming through in its back, you can start doing sitting trot, and it's not nearly as uncomfortable for either you or the horse. But there is no necessity to do a lot of sitting trot at an early or an intermediate stage. And just take a look at some of those show jumpers and see how the horses are really lifting in their backs, which connects with what I said earlier on about the thoroughbred horse. It has a greater capacity to engage the back than many other breeds. Now, of course, it doesn't apply across the board. You get good ones and bad ones, of course. But generally speaking, there's more elasticity, more flexibility in the thoroughbred horse's back, which is why the thoroughbred horse is so important.
And I think we're just one or two last questions there. So what would be the best products to use for hot clothing at the sales? Anyone have any?
Hot clothing at the sales.
Hot clothing at the sales. I can't do that.
I love a bit of Dettol and baby oil. Like just one capful of Dettol and a couple of dollops of baby oil. Or Supreme products do a hot oil, but I'm a bit of a cheap and cheerful person, so Dettol and baby oil for me.
That's it. It's always probably easier to have that. That's slightly easier a method to use than having to go out and buy the fancy stuff all the whole time, is it? And
everyone always has a bottle of baby oil when you're at the sale.
I think there's one more question there. So how often should a horse get the foreign copper dose?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. Obviously, the foreign equine, we do the Copper Max paste. So that's your chelated copper and zinc. And the zinc obviously helps the absorption. So they come in a really handy gel format. So we'd recommend copper dosing. And again, it does depend on different land and obviously the copper that's within their forage and their soil. But certainly you're going to maybe, and again, life stage, if it's a young horse versus maybe a mare in her last trimester, they're going to have different requirements. But generally speaking, you'd be safe enough to copper dose, say, 2 or 3 doses in a row with like a 2 to 3 week break in between, depending on what the individual needs. But you can always reach out and actually ask either your nutritionist or even your vet can help you just make that decision. But it's actually interesting from a copper function as well, when we're talking about kind of show and sales prep. Copper has a really important role in even coat pigmentation. So even helping horses transition from that spring to summer coat, or if you have a chestnut, or maybe even my own horse, he's dapple grey, but he can go a real kind of coppery roan colour. But I find when I'm supplementing him with the Copper Max at that kind of spring season time, definitely it helps with the pigmentation of the coat come out. So, you know, we find people who, if they're showing dun ponies or the Connemars that might be the bays, or the duns, the chestnuts, it really helps in the coat pigmentation. So particularly for sales prep and show ring prep, it's something to consider as well.
And I think we have time just for one last question. So how do you know if your horse has a bad mouth, and what can you do to kind of help improve them at the sales? Anyone there, Mita maybe, or I don't know, Ciara, if you've gone to kind of shows to help?
I think William would be good for that one, because he was talking earlier about the tongue over the bit problem that a lot of young horses come to us with.
I'm not sure what they mean by a bad mouth there, but generally speaking, again, as I said, they get a white mouth with a bitless bridle as long as they're going in a decent way. Most horses who are unresponsive in the mouth, it's because there's something wrong further back, or somebody has tried to just get a result just by using force. So bad training produces bad mouths. Now, there are some horses who have sensitivities in the mouth that even with a good trainer, there are problems. So that's when you want to have a closer look at the horse. Personally, I always remove wolf teeth as an example, because I find that, you know, with the nerve endings in a wolf teeth, a lot of horses really respond negatively to the wolf teeth. I also, my Micklem bridle is specifically designed to avoid pressure on the inside of the mouth on the tissue, where it goes over the protruding upper jaw molar teeth. On the side of the cheek here, so many people don't realize that it's not all flat inside the mouth, that the upper jaw molar teeth are so much wider than the lower jaw molar teeth. So the flesh gets trapped between the noseband on the outside and the tooth on the inside. And people say, well, I have 2 fingers in our noseband, so it's quite loose. But they don't realize that the horse is opening the mouth as they ride, and as it opens the mouth, it tightens on the outside. So I would say that it's not a small number. It's a large number of horses have lacerations on the inside of their mouth over those teeth. And that's something which people need to be very aware of. But generally speaking, as long as the horse is started off with a comfortable bit without any force on it, very few horses actually have a problem with a bit. On the other side of the coin, there are very few bitless bridles that are really comfortable for a horse. Having a bitless bridle is not just the easy answer. You have to find a bitless bridle that is really comfortable for a horse, and that's not easy.
I think I suppose we're coming to the end of things here. So I'm going to ask all of our panel kind of one final question. You can have a think about it just as we're going to it. But it's really in 1 or 2 sentences, a very quick sum up, final kind of tips or tricks on your showing, your sales preparation, or the general horsemanship. I don't know if anyone has something to mind, they can jump straight in, but I might pick on one of you in a minute there if you don't.
I was thinking, as William was saying about sitting trot and horses not being strong in their back, and very much the point of, if the horse isn't coming through from behind, it's not going to be correct in front of your leg. A lot of people over here would put their side saddles on way too much. You are able to school your horse to go side saddle astride. They do not need to have your side saddle on every week. It is so heavy on their back. You're not sitting level on your seat bones. It just is a recipe for disaster, in my opinion. And you could do so much of your training astride that there shouldn't be a need to have your side saddle on once a week. And it will cause horses to hollow in their back and not come through. And and cause you problems down the line. So my bit of advice would be do your homework astride and put your saddle on once every couple of weeks. Last year I qualified for Dublin and I didn't put it on again until the week before because my homework was done.
My father used to show horses, and he asked a very famous old showman called Count Robert Orsich to help him. He said, "Why are my young horses not going better?" And he was asked, "Well, how often are you riding them?" And he said, "Well, 5 or 6 days a week." He said, "Ride them 2 days a week." And there's a similar thing there. The three things that I would always come back to, which will never, ever let you down, is calm, forwards, and straight. Doesn't matter what activity you're doing with horses. And calmness is mental. Forwardness is also a mental quality, of which, if you're talking about the advantages of the thoroughbred horse, generally speaking, the thoroughbred horse is forward thinking because it's bred as a racehorse. So that's super important. I'd always rather have a horse that was a little over forward than backwards. And to calm, forwards, and straight, I would add acceptance at the top. So it's another mental thing. The horse has to accept you, first of all. And at the bottom, I would add purity. And by purity, I mean that the natural way of going of the horse, its paces and way of going, that it's natural, that everything blends together in a natural way, as opposed to a horse that's made it to go in an unnatural shape. So calm, forwards, and straight at the heart of it. You start working the horse, you've got to maintain the acceptance, develop the acceptance, and always maintain and develop the purity of the step and the stride all the way through, which if you're starting off in the game, you're going to need help so that you can begin to, with your eyes and your ears, see what a good walk, trot, and canter gallop is. Thank you. And thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Nita or Jane?
Well, you know my three.
Yeah.
But I suppose it's to think about things from the horse's point of view. We put them into this situation. You know, what can we do within the constraints and the confines of what we're doing with them? What can we do to still give them a good life? And it's back to friends, forage, freedom.
And then Jane, you can sum it up for us.
Yeah, obviously echo and agree with everything everyone has said. And I suppose from my perspective, it's just don't be afraid to ask for help. You know, I know certainly in my own horses, that's something I've learned over the last couple of years, is just to, definitely be my peers, or again, you know, the experts in the field like William, or coaches that are around you. Just don't be afraid to ask for help, and that applies on the feeding side as well. And to enjoy the journey, getting to know your horse and celebrate the small wins. You know, sometimes we can be hyper focused on getting out on the big day and bringing home the red rosette. Obviously that's incredible, but it is celebrating those small wins, those small pieces of progress. And like Ciara and I said, like you're competing against yourself every time you go out, and to again enjoy the journey with your horse as you feel them grow in confidence and improve, and that can take time. So obviously patience. But yeah, that'd be my take.
And it's a privilege. What William was saying, they're totally unjudgmental and unbiased, and it's a privilege that we all get to spend time with them and work with them every day, because we won't always have them.
But I also think we must be very careful that we mention a lot of stuff. We must not put people off. I have what I call my go rules, and rule number 1 is have a go, and rule number 2 is have a go and do it better using the help of other people. And if you don't have a go at the start, the whole process comes to a full stop straight away. So have a go, have another go, and then the third one is produce the goods. In other words, you do it in a good way. So I did that. I make a mention of it because it's so important to me to help with young people. And I did a TED talk on my go rules. And instead of being rules that are negative, they are rules that are positive. So alongside simplicity, all the way through, everything should go positivity. Thank you.
I think that's it. I suppose it's the positive mindset to keeping it simple, having a go at things. It's really the horsemanship, and that is what lasts everyone a lifetime. I'd like to thank, I suppose, everyone, again, our panel. Thank you for your time tonight. To all of our attendees, and to everyone who had a question there in the chat, thank you for joining us tonight. I hope there were plenty of nuggets, plenty of insights there for everyone. We will have the recording available if anyone wants to jump back there and have a look. But other than that, I want to thank everyone for attending, and look, we hope to see you at our next couple of events.
Thanks a million. Thank you, guys.
Thank
Thanks.
you.